Hello, my name is Christopher Brown, and I'm a desk officer here at OGE. Today, I'm going to give you some data that can help you benchmark your agency's ethics program. So what is benchmarking and why is it important? Generally, benchmarking is comparing against an external standard. It's a fancy way of saying you're comparing yourself to others who are doing a good job. Benchmarking can be one of those several tools available to a DAO or ethics program manager to assess how their program is doing. Obviously, you want to meet all the requirements in the regulation. OGE comes out to agencies about every 4 years to do program reviews. Getting 100% compliance across all your employees in all areas is not always realistic. So one way to judge your performance, especially in between program reviews, is to compare yourself against your peers. Today's presentation is really a mix of practices and benchmarking. So I'll have some stats, charts showing you the distribution of compliance rates for certain program areas, especially training and financial disclosure, but I'll also be sharing examples of specific agency practices that hopefully inspire you, with the hope that you may be able to apply some of these practices to your program. So let's take a look at today's agenda. Next slide. Now on slide 2. Today I will cover the following. I'll provide you a quick background about the annual questionnaire. Next, I'll focus on how agencies are assessing and evaluating their programs and what changes they're implementing as a result. I'll provide some stats and specific examples. As I mentioned, the idea is to see what other agencies are doing and to learn from and be inspired by your peers. Then I'll walk through some key compliance rates for training and financial disclosure. I'll show you the distribution of agency compliance rates, and you can see whether your compliance rates are in the majority or fall as an outlier. Finally, I'll discuss some ways OGE can consult with your agency to put the data from the annual questionnaire to help you benchmark against specific data points that are most relevant to you and your agency. Next slide. Now on slide 3. The annual questionnaire fulfills a statutory reporting requirement. The Ethics in Government Act requires agencies to submit an annual report to OGE, and as set out in regulation, the annual questionnaire fulfills that requirement. We post individual responses online. We also post a summary online. That summary aggregates the responses and provides a short narrative overview of the results. The next slides 4 through 9, use screenshots to show you how to access individual agency responses and the summary report. I won't go through those slides in depth, but I wanted to have them in the presentation so you could refer to them afterwards. So I'm now going to be skipping ahead to slide 10. So here we go. Next slide, slide 4. Next slide, slide 5. Next slide, slide 6. Next slide, slide 7. Next slide, slide 8. Next slide, slide 9. And next slide, slide 10. I'm now on slide 10. And we're going to look at how agencies assess, and we'll look at the results of those assessments. In fact, I'm going to start with some of the results. Next slide, slide 11. Now on slide 11. In question 11 of the annual questionnaire, we asked whether your agency evaluated any aspect of the ethics program in 2022. Here we see that 53% of agencies did. In 2021, 57% of agencies did. Back in 2022, 62% of agencies said they did. Next slide. Now on slide 10. Then we asked agencies whether the assessment resulted in programmatic or policy changes. And we asked the agencies to describe them. To see the full set of responses, go to the annual questionnaire summary report that was back in slides 7 through 9. Question 12 includes a link to a table with all the agency's responses. Highlighted below, up above there with the arrow, pointing to the blue. The following several slides slides pull several examples from agencies' written responses. While I'm not going to go through each of them, I will highlight at least one per slide. And even though I'm not discussing each of the examples, I included a variety of responses so that you have the flavor of the various agency actions and you have examples to refer to later. Next slide. Now on slide 13. We saw self-assessments that resulted in training improvements. These examples highlight some of the changes we saw repeated in other responses as well. These reviews can be a good way to enlist leadership to make a programmatic change or streamline a process. Just like in the last bullet point, where a large agency made employee start dates available to ethics staff to ensure timely training. Next slide. Now on slide 14. Expanding consistency was a common theme throughout the responses. It appears agencies often find the audits to be a good way to develop an SOP or procedure to ensure advice stays consistent across the agency over time. As two of the responses highlighted above, their program evaluation provided the opportunity to update their GIFT procedures. Next slide. Now on slide 15. With respect to financial disclosure, a move to automation was the common theme. Whether it was to automate reminders or late notices, adding new software, or developing improved 450 practices, the audits seemed to result in greater automation frequently. Next slide. Now on slide 16. To end on a positive note regarding evaluations and audits, one outcome mentioned by more than a few agencies was as a result of their audit, agencies were able to hire additional staff or balance workloads across existing staff, as it appears the audits might have helped clarify the substantial workload that you are also familiar with. Next slide. Now on slide 17. Here we turn to methods of assessment. In question 22 of the questionnaire, we asked agencies whether or how they assessed risk to inform their ethics, education, and communication approaches. Of the 141 respondents, 120, or 85%, reported some kind of assessment, and that was up from 81% 2 years ago. The most common approach, with 91% of agencies doing it, was to talk to employees about ethics concerns they encountered in the workplace. Next in line, with 83 agencies selecting it, was discussing upcoming work and agency priorities with senior staff. Next was review advice logs for common issues. Now, many agencies reported doing more than one. So how do you compare with your peers? And which of these might you incorporate in your program? If you're interested in hearing experiences from other agencies doing these, you can look at the individual responses, or that's something you can email me, and I can identify similar sized or similarly situated agencies. Next slide. Now on slide 18. In the previous slide, we saw how agencies assess risk. In question 23 of the questionnaire, we asked agencies the methods they use for evaluating effectiveness of ethics education and communication. Of the 141 respondents, 117 reported doing some kind of assessment. That's 83%. Some agencies reported doing more than one of these activities. Again, which side here do you fall on? If you didn't do an assessment this year, did you do one the previous year? Are you planning one for the coming year? Next slide. I'm now on slide 19, back on the agenda. Let's talk about benchmarking against key compliance rates, specifically with respect to timeliness of initial ethics training and timeliness of review and certification of financial disclosure. So why is timeliness of training and timeliness of processing financial disclosure important? For new employees, initial ethics training is their introduction to ethics at your agency and your ethics office and all their resources. a roadmap for ethics issue spotting, so you know so they know when to come to you and seek advice. And the financial disclosure is the opportunity to identify and resolve potential conflicts. Delays in training and reviewing those disclosures create risk for the employee. Delays also create risk for the agency. If an employee inadvertently violates ethics rules because the employee wasn't aware of the rules, it may undermine the agency's mission and operation. Maybe an employee participates in an adjudication or grant application or procurement when they have a conflict. How does the agency remedy that situation? It takes time and resources and can affect the public's perception of the agency. Or, for the few bad apples out there, misconduct that occurs before training or financial disclosure makes it difficult for the agency to show bad intent or personnel actions. Okay, so let's look at the data. Next slide. I'm now on slide 20. In question 17, we asked agencies to report how many employees were required to receive initial ethics training and how many received it within the 3-month deadline. Starting with the column on the far right, 119 agencies reported that 95% of their employees received their initial ethics training within the 3-month deadline. That's an increase from last year. If you move one column over, you'll see that 10 agencies had between 90 and 95% of their employees complete initial training timely. I think that's actually probably 8 employees this year. As you move to the left, you'll see lower and lower percentages of employees that completed the initial training at time. But as you can see in the far right column, the majority of the agencies are doing a great job. For benchmarking, where do you fall? Where do you want your response to be? If you have a low percentage of employees who are getting timely training, what are the causes and how can you address them? This is where reviewing practices of agencies can be helpful. Refer to the examples in the slides above for more examples and go to that summary report. Maybe establishing monthly reports from HR to identify new employees, or maybe it's offering trainings a little more frequently, or working with leadership and IT to implement a freeze on computer access until training is complete. Okay, next slide. Now on slide 21. The 2022 annual questionnaire was the 4th year that we asked about timeliness of reviews and certification of process, which then made this the 3rd year that we're reporting out the data. Let's look at those results. This chart shows the timeliness of initial reviews for both public reports and confidential reports. Public reports, the 278s, are in blue. Confidential reports are in orange and 450. What does it mean to be timely? Agencies should review reports promptly and, according to regulations, should complete this initial review within 60 days. Meaning you review the entire report and identify the main issues, which could be missing information or need technical corrections, and of course, most importantly, potential conflicts of interest. If there are no issues, you can certify the report. We'll look at certification timeliness in the next slide. It's important to note that the 60-day deadline for a review is really the outer limit. The idea is that agencies start the review sooner, so that potential conflicts are identified and resolved as quickly as possible. Okay, so back to the chart. What we see here is that we've got 119 agencies on the public reports that completed their initial review within 60 days, and that's for 95%. And looking at confidential reports, that number drops to 104 agencies who reported completing their initial review within 60 days, or at least 95% or more of those confidential reports. And some of them did have compliance rates at 99% or above. What we see here is the vast majority of the agencies are timely reviewing 95% or more of their reports, which is excellent. And there were roughly about 28,000 public reports and nearly 380,000 confidential reports filed across the executive branch last year. So timely review of 95% of the reports filed at an agency is quite good. These numbers are a testament to the hard work of ethics officials. It's also a testament to the value of electronic filing. Let's look at the timeliness of certification on the next slide. Here we go. I'm now on slide 22. On this slide, we see a majority of the agencies reported that they certified within 60 days. Specifically, here we see that on the public reports, 76 agencies reported certifying within 60 days for 95% of those reports. And again, on confidential reports, that number goes up to 92 agencies that report certification within 60 days for 95% of confidential. Again, here the numbers are good, though we do see some slippage. In the previous slide, we looked at just public reports. 6 agencies were timely for review on the previous slide for 75% of reports. That's the bar on the far left. And then this chart, 25% of 25 agencies were timely in their certification, 35%. If your agency were to have 2,000 public reports and a quarter of those reports were not certified timely, that would be 500 reports that are curing potential vulnerabilities over time. So what I was trying to do there was show in the previous slide how that number jumped from 6 to 25 when we go from 6 agencies doing that initial review at 75% or less. We jump to 25 agencies who have that certification of 75% or less. So it's a fairly large jump. And what's causing that delay? And how can it be addressed? Let's look at the process and when it's a substantive issue versus just a process bottleneck. What work can you do before filing or during a review? Think back to those examples that we were talking about previously and how audits were useful for figuring out work distribution or potentially bringing on new staff. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm now on slide 23, and this is an opportunity for us to talk about specific consultation and benchmarking. So we'll take this to the next slide, which is the last slide, slide 24. So benchmarking is not the single way to evaluate your program, but it is an important aspect of evaluation. And what comes down to what would you like to know? So the examples, it could be, I want to make a case for spending more time on ethics. Or perhaps you think your agency is too generous with waivers or extensions. So we can help you combine some data points. Do you need more resources or use of contractors or staffing? Do people with resources have better compliance numbers? Which agencies said they didn't need more resources and still had good compliance rates? We can help you put you in touch with those agencies or provide a list for that. And so this is an opportunity for I guess, there is one more slide so you can have my contact information. We can move it to the next slide, last slide, slide 25. So this is where you can reach out to me more directly, and we have had some contact. This is some chance for me to tell you about how a couple agencies have reached out to specifically cull some of the data for their specific need. Like you can look at the summary report, and we just went through some of that data, and you're able to see where some agencies are or where the majorities are, but that might not feel like a good one-to-one lineup. You maybe want to look at large agencies like yours or small agencies like yours. You maybe want to look at some who have missions that are abroad because that's where you fall, or maybe only at agencies that operate domestically. You can give us the criteria of how you want to narrow the data, and we can try to help supply that to you. And I can speak to how we've been able to put agencies in touch with each other so that they were able to get the data directly from the agencies they needed, but also how we were able to provide sometimes either slimmed amount of data, but they just wanted to know a sliver of information, whereas once also previously an agency asked for a very broad data set because they wanted to make their own arguments to their own leadership about workloads, and they wanted to kind of be able to see almost all of the annual questionnaire data across the board. We were able to provide the agency that so that they could kind of make the selective cuts that they needed to show, because some of it was about SGEs, or some of it was about work abroad, and so they were able to figure out the crucial points where they were having those bottlenecks. So those are very specific examples, but I'm sure your agencies have those specific examples as well, and could use some information, and that's where I hope you take a look at that information on the screen. You've got my email there, and that you can reach out should you have any questions that we might be able to help you with more specific. I thank you for your time today, and I'll be a part of a live question and answer